Passover, freedom from slavery, Exodus and redemption, the birth of the Jewish nation more than 3,000 years ago. But what is its message today? Fly free. In honor of the Rebbe's birthday, delve into the Rebbe's teachings on the meaning of freedom and discover the timeless message of the Haggadah. Listen to a fascinating roundtable discussion on freedom and Passover with Rabbis Aharon Weinstein, Shais Taub Aryeh Raskin, interspersed with the Rebbe's talks. Hear a first-hand account from Mrs. Molly Resnick, who embarked on a journey of personal growth and transformation. And let soulful melodies of freedom, performed by a string quartet, tug at the strings of your heart. Ever since our people stepped into the desert sun, free from the clutches of Egypt, we have been fascinated by the topic of freedom. In preparation for Passover, join our panel of rabbis as they hold a pre-Seder Farbrengen. Hear insights into the Haggadah that are sure to give you food for thought as you chew your matzah on Seder night. Join us as we explore personal freedom, freedom of mind, spirit, and soul. This Passover, let your soul fly free.
Welcome to our pre-Passover event, Fly Free, Exploring Ideas on Personal Freedom. We're going to be starting our program with a video of the Rebbe speaking at his birthday in 1972, 50 years ago, at an assembly where thousands of his Hasidim came to receive this gift from the Rebbe of being taught new ideas which expand their horizons and our horizons as we watch this message today, a special message related to personal freedom.
Und wer sagt der Loschen in Michilte, dass bedugme, wie man nimmt, Reis dem Mubor, mi beteich mi Kerev. Wo das weiß der Chechet in der Loschen am Michilte, demut gewähnt der Leider von Am Yisrael. Was demut stellt sich die Scheile, mit Zaderu, wo der Lokachas Leigei mi Kerev Geser das gewähnt, bichwede u beatzmei. Lei alle de Maloch, lei alle de Sorof, lei alle de Shaliach, ani hu lei Acher. Wie bald das ist Mathe wieder von verstandig, als das, was sie geboren geworden, Lokachas Leigei mi Kerev Gei, על ידי הקדוש ברוך הוא בכבדי ובעצמי, זכר דתכליס השלימוס שלי. אז זול שתיין אין המצב טוב, ונהובן טוב אין טוב בתכליס השלימוס. Was על פי זה kommt es בהשקופה ראשינה. אז was für a טוב ist בתכליס השלימוס, בשעס מדף אבדרוף נתהובן, כן יגיע. על דרך זה זכר בנגי zu Kloles Am Yisrael. sagt man gleich bei Hitziach, es Omazem in Mitzrayim, wo das ist sich wie gerät früher, leidas am Israel, lokachas leigei mikerev gei, sagt man gleich bei Hitziach, es Omazem in Mitzrayim, ist nicht mit erzählt, dass demoltet sein Cheres und demoltet bringen Eretz Tevor Chova. Und sie sahen der Lächel mit Pirio, wie Lisbea mit Tuvo, nur mir sagt, dass demut wird man der Griechen haben die Möglichkeit, Tavdun es Horekim, al-Horazeh. Bechiyeri ist das Heper von Schleimus Hatev, Bishas mi verbindt das mit einer Anstrengung, mit einer Weide, wo darf aufnehmen, Halomis Vesterim Nis und Bilbuli. Ich sage, auf der Ruf der Bior, Beloschen Hayodua, hat der Rebbe hat nicht gewollt, als soll sein Name dich Sufa. Wie mir selbst betewe, als ein Mensch bekommt eine Sache, und keine Stadlos mit Zidei. Und kein Afile Ovid Neichele Nafsche, wo demot Johev Lema Tante, und das ist echt nicht gewesen, ist auch demot wird das angerufen, Name dich Sufe.
Freedom cannot be given to us. Freedom must be created by us. This was the message embedded within what the Rebbe was saying. We find ourselves in circumstances, as the Jews in Egypt found themselves in a set of circumstances. And what God demonstrated is that by simply taking a people and moving them from one set of circumstances to another is actually not going to give them freedom. And out of God's infinite and abundant kindness, He didn't stop there, but insisted that He give us the full package, the full freedom. What is the full freedom? The full freedom is not just a change of circumstances. We can change circumstances, and the circumstances may be a little bit better, but we find ourselves in a new set of circumstances. Freedom is experienced when our spirit soars. And despite whatever circumstances we find ourselves in, what we bring to those circumstances is our spirit. That is freedom. And there's a fascinating anecdote which I read from the well-known refusenik and human rights advocate, Natan Sharansky. He shares in his memoir, Fear No Evil, a fascinating account. And in this account, he shares how he sat in prison for 9 years. And he was oppressed. This was not a civilized prison. He was interrogated, he was tortured. And he was tortured physically and emotionally, psychologically. But one thing he demonstrated, above all else, is that no matter what they did to him, nothing broke his spirit. Nothing broke his spirit. He demonstrated true freedom. And he shares a unique account which really clarifies what freedom truly is. He shares how one day he was called in once again to be interrogated. And of course, there were always two interrogators in the room, because in a country that's controlled by fear, you always make sure everyone is being watched by someone else, and then everyone behaves. So the two interrogators are interrogating him. And he was used to this. He's been through this ringer numerous times. So he decided that he's going to try and do something different. And he started to interrupt the interrogation and insist that he needs to tell them a joke. And while that normally would never fly, somehow that day he was able to pull that off, and he got them to stop interrogating him. And they were quiet, and he started his joke. And his joke was this: Premier Brezhnev decided that Russia, the former Soviet Union, had to outdo the West. The West sent astronauts to the moon. He said, we're going to outdo them. We're going to be the first country to send cosmonauts to the sun. So he calls in the cosmonauts and he tells them his brilliant plan. All of this Natan Sharansky is saying to his two interrogators. The cosmonauts are gripped by fear, because here the premier is saying he's going to send them to the sun. And so they gently suggest to the Premier Brezhnev, you understand that before we're even a quarter of the way there, we're going to burn up alive. And so Brezhnev told them, you think I didn't think of that? We'll send you at night. And then Sharansky sat back and he started to laugh and laugh. He had the moment of his life laughing and laughing while he's looking at these two interrogators and watching both of them desperately controlling themselves from laughing. And after his fit of laughter, he turns to them and says, let me ask you a question. Who is the free person in the room and who is the prisoner? I get to laugh freely. And the two of you are terrified to show any expression. What Natan Sharansky demonstrated in this moment was that no matter what our circumstances are, we always have the ability to bring our spirit into the situation. And that is the only way a person experiences actual freedom. What's fascinating is that the Haggadah mentions to us one of the biblical mitzvahs that we have on the night of the Seder. And that is the mitzvah of Sipur Yetzias Mitzrayim. Mitzvah aleinu l'saper, it is a mitzvah upon us to tell the story of the exodus from Egypt. It's a mitzvah to speak the story. You know, there are two stories, one of two stories that we can live in at any time. One story is the story that we perceive about ourselves. Who I am, what I'm capable of, what is possible for me, what isn't possible for me. That's one story we can live in. And it's a constricted, limiting story. What do we do when we find that this is limiting? We try and make the story a better story, expand our lives, change the circumstances. But the whole idea is that there's another story. And this story is not the story we perceive. This is the story that was given to us. And that is not who we are trying to make ourselves to be, but the person who we are. When we simply let the spirit that was invested within us shine forth through us, and let it just shine through our body, we suddenly experience the truest sense of liberation. And what's fascinating is that the Haggadah tells us, V'chol hamar belasaper b'yitzias Mitzrayim harei zeh meshubach. Anyone that actually expands on the conversation of the story of going out of Egypt, they experience something unique. When a person chooses to shift from our story about ourselves to the story that God gave us when he took us out of Egypt, where he not only changed our circumstances, but he also gave us a mission through which we can express our spirit, we suddenly feel a connection with God which we haven't felt until now. We actually feel true liberation. As we sit by the Seder, may every single one of us, as we reflect on the birth of the Jewish people, of Am Yisrael, who were born as they were taken out of Egypt, may we also experience our own birth of a newer and deeper level of our neshama, of our spirit.
You know, Rabbi, you remind me of the joke about Sharansky, or Sharansky's joke that he told. There's an old joke back in the Soviet Union. A judge walks out of his chambers and he starts laughing. And one of the lawyers there says to the judge, What are you laughing? He says, I just remembered a joke. He says, tell me the joke. He says, I can't, I just gave somebody 20 years for it.
Very good, very good.
So somebody who can't even repeat a joke, right? What kind of freedom is that? What kind of life is that,
yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
So Baruch Hashem, we're here. We can say what we want. We can tell a joke, tell a story. And you know, when you mentioned about being mar b'lasapir, to increase in telling the story, it means that we don't just read the Haggadah. The Haggadah is the beginning. The Haggadah is the beginning. It gives us the foundation. But you know, it's a time to Farbrengen, to get together and to talk, to share stories, inspiration, personal anecdotes, whatever it is that you're connecting to about freedom. So the Haggadah is just to begin with, and then we build on it with our own personal stories.
I think it's fair to say that over the last 2,000 years, there was never a time that Jews have experienced such freedom. It's true that we might have had great sages in the time of the Talmud and Ezra HaSofer and Rabbi Akiva, but the generation that we live today is a time where people can walk down the street with a yarmulke and tzitzis out of their pants, mezuzah on their doors, not to be afraid who's going to look at them or say something to them. So we really have to thank God for this freedom that we are experiencing today.
It's very interesting because I just spoke to a group of college students last night, and the rabbi, he introduced all the students to me. And one of the students, he said, this boy walks all over campus with a yarmulke. He said, that's how I discovered it. I found him. Easy to identify a Jew who's wearing a yarmulke. And I said, wow, what an introduction to what we're going to talk about freedom, because you are one liberated guy. You just live from, you live from within. Your spirit just shines forth, and it's not the context that defines you, but you're defining the context. Very, very powerful.
You remind me of when Jonathan Sachs, Olav Shalom, he just passed away this year, but when he was a college student. So he was at Cambridge, and he visited the Rebbe, and he thought he was going to interview the Rebbe, and the Rebbe flipped the tables on him and interviewed him and said, what are you doing for Jewish students on campus? So he never thought, oh, what am I doing, Grandma? Yeah. So he said he started to construct this very convoluted sentence to sort of like excuse himself. He said, well, in the situation in which I currently find myself, the Rebbe did something which I think for him was very unusual. He cut me off. He interrupted the sentence. The Rebbe said, you don't find yourself in a situation. You create your situation.
You put yourself in a situation.
Yeah. Very profound. Yeah.
They say there's a difference between two kinds of people, a thermometer and a thermostat. The thermometer tells you the temperature in the room. The thermostat tells the room the temperature.
Right, that's it. And that's the choice we get to make, and that's the difference between a liberated, more of a liberated person. I always like to say, actually, that it's not as if we achieve freedom. One of the students asked me, when do you become free? It's a continuum, and the question is, are we moving towards freedom and out of constriction?
Less reactive, more proactive.
Precisely.
Less defined by our environment and more defining the environment.
Yeah.
And that's really the mitzvah every day to remember going out of Egypt. As Chassidus says that Egypt etymologically means borders and constraints. Every day you have to go out of Egypt because every day you go to a new level of redemption. So today's redemption is tomorrow's Egypt. So it's a continuum. Every day, a new redemption.
And if we're going towards God, it's an infinite journey.
Right, there's no end.
Yeah. We're now going to listen to a fascinating account from a fascinating woman about her personal story of freedom and liberation, Mrs. Molly Resnick.
I grew up in Tel Aviv, Israel. That's where I was raised. I went to Hebrew University of Jerusalem, but in a totally secular family, Sephardic from Bulgaria. None of my parents or grandparents observed anything. I would ask me, who are you? I would say, well, I'm an American Israeli. I'm a journalist. I'm a feminist. I'm an ethicist. I'm a humanist. And I am also Jewish. What's there to being Jewish? I used to avoid people with black hats and long black coats as best as I could. I came from the land of milk and honey into the land of gold and money. This was the land of opportunity, and I came here to seek my fortune. I was lucky enough, I started at Public Broadcasting Corporation, and then from there I landed this job at NBC News, a producer at an interview program called 5 Minutes With.
From WNBC TV New York, this is Live at 5 with Jack Cafferty.
This was in the 70s, 80s, and there was no Oprah, and there was no Donahue, and no Lakey Bakey. There was the Today Show and my show. And whether it was Gregory Peck, or it was Muhammad Ali, or it was President Carter or his wife, or Begin or Rabin, they all wanted to promote something, and they wanted to get on my show.
I assume a certain amount of it is actually happening. Well, I don't know Bob Ludlam, but I do know Freddie Forsyth.
And I came from a country that didn't have television, So really, I was a total novice, and for me, it was like dreaming that this was really happening to me.
This has been Live at 5 with Jack Cafferty and Sue Simmons. I'm Don Pardo.
As I was working at NBC, part of me was saying, is this what it's all about? Just meeting famous people, getting them on tape. And I decided that I was going to take a trip around the world and I was going to look for the meaning of life. What's it all about? I started with Central America, from Panama to Peru, Machu Picchu. From Machu Picchu, I arrived in Rio de Janeiro, and there, for some unknown reason, I had to prove that I was Jewish, and so I was looking for a rabbi. And it ended up being a man with a black hat and a black coat, and I walked in, and the woman said, "Did you light candles?" And to me, lighting candles is voodoo, and it was the most frightening thing in the world, but I don't know what got me to do it. But suddenly, it hit me that there was a God, and there was a purpose to life, and this was the beginning of the rest of my life, which was around 40 years ago. I was lucky enough to marry the Rebbe's doctor, Dr. Lawrence Raskin, may he rest in peace. I wanted to meet the Rebbe. I asked my husband to tell him that I wanted to have an interview with him. I got an appointment. I dressed for the appointment according to the book. Navy blue gabardine suit, canary yellow blouse, pearls, patent leather shoes, alligator handbag, voice-activated tape recorder inside, and I walk into the Rebbe. And the Rebbe says, "Do you always dress like this?" And I said, "What's wrong with what I'm wearing?" And the Rebbe said, "Now you came to see me. I want to make sure you always look like this." What I realized that the Rebbe was telling me is that I'm part of a nation that's royalty. Royalty in the general sense of the word, that we are the daughters of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, and that this is our role. We're supposed to look dignified and refined and classic, and we're supposed to be role models to the whole world. On Sundays, thousands of people would flock by the Rebbe. There was never a time that I passed by him for dollars that he didn't stop me and ask me where the children went to school, what we were doing for the holidays, everything the Rebbe wanted to know.
How was lectures?
Baruch Hashem, it was wonderful in Sfat. It was especially successful. He was totally encouraging on my speaking. He would ask my husband, "When is she speaking next? The Rabbi Grona, did you arrange a speech for her?"
Thank you. Thank you. Happy birthday. Thank you very much.
There was one time that it was just before Pesach, and I had my two children with me. I think I might have been holding my daughter too.
Who is asking the questions? Was it there?
Yes.
Was?
Yes.
And your husband has your answer to all of them.
So thank you.
Thank you very much.
I am the most fortunate person in the world. I was married to a wonderful man who was a doctor, and I have 3 wonderful children. I'm so proud of them, and 2 of them are shluchim of the Rebbe, and one of them is an editor of the Jewish press. And I look around at life and I say, I couldn't have asked for anything more, and I'm so grateful, because if it weren't for the Rebbe and his mission to send his best and his brightest around the world, I would never be where I am today.
Wow, what a story. Thank you so much, Mrs. Raskin, for sharing that inspiring story with all of us, that we could all hopefully emulate in our own way and apply in our own lives. So we're talking about Yud Aleph Nisan, the Rebbe's birthday. And you mentioned the Farbrengen from 1972. There was a Farbrengen in 1976. And those who are familiar with the current events of the time, in the spring of 1976, the richest man in the world at the time died. April of 76. Howard Hughes. It was big news. Now, nobody expected that the Rebbe was going to mention it at the Farbrengen, But at the Farbrengen, the Rebbe started to speak about freedom. And freedom as an internal state of being. I mean, you mentioned this earlier. the story of Sharansky, and about perspective, freedom being a perspective. So the Rebbe began by explaining that, Moshe Rabbeinu, Moses, when he told the Jewish people, we're going out of here, we're going free. It was Rosh Chodesh Nisan, it was the first day, it was the new moon, it was the first day of the month. And the actual Exodus took place on the 15th of the month, so 2 weeks later. And for those 2 weeks, the Jews were still physically in Egypt, but they were already spiritually, they had gone, they had left, they transcended the whole situation. A person can be technically in a certain situation, physically these are his surroundings, but mentally he's already transcended it, he's left it behind, he outgrew it already. So the Jews, for 2 weeks before they actually physically got up and left Egypt, they had already left Egypt. They weren't there anymore. They were no longer slaves. That a person can be in a situation and not be limited by it, because this is the power of the human spirit. Now, conversely, a person could be in a situation of total abundance. He could have the whole world in front of him, all the resources a person could dream of, and be a slave because of his mentality. And then the Rebbe said, as we know, somebody very prominent just passed away, and he was very wealthy, and he had every opportunity. He could do anything he wanted, but he lived as a slave. He lived as a hermit, as a recluse. He didn't trust anyone. He thought everyone was out to get him. So you see, it's not about our surroundings. It's not about our environment. It's about our mentality. When we feel free, we are free. A very powerful idea when you think about, Jewish history, and about how many times throughout Jewish history, the Jewish people we're in Golus, we're in exile, we wander from country to country, and not always under protection of the law, not always able to own property, and not always safe, and not always with food in the pantry. The Jewish people have experienced such levels of lack of security in all the things that a nation would define as providing security, not having their own land, and not having their own government, and not having protection under the law. And yet, because of our connection with Hashem, because of our trust, because we know Hashem has redeemed us and Hashem will redeem us again, so none of those things could undermine our ability to be free people. We're going to watch now a clip from that Farbrengen from Yud Aleph Nisan Tavshin Lamed Vav from April 1976.
Als sie dort Menschen nicht verkehren, nicht verkehren Menschen gedacht, was haben sie gefunden in einem schrecklichen Zustand und Bescheid sollen bei sich machlich gewesen, mit sich nicht rechnen, mit dem Eiswenig und mit sich verbinden, nicht ewige Sachen, wo das der Terror nicht ist und mit Zwisser, allein nehmen, wo Chaibahem, ist auch viele sein, die Knetiste gedacht in der Concentration Camp, haben sie bei sich gefühlt auf Freiheit, Scheile Meilo Himem. Und mir gefühlt von der zweiten Seite, a Menschen, was haben nicht gehabt bei sich keine Begrenzungen und haben gekonnt tun, wo sie wollen und haben gehabt die größte Möglichkeiten der. Ist zusammen damit haben sie gelebt im Leben in einem Zustand von der größten und niedrigsten Knechtschaft, wie sie kann sein.
There's nothing that gets us more into the flow than a Chassidish nigun, a Chassidic melody. So we're going to hear now a beautiful rendering of a Chassidic melody.
The Holy Zohar tells a story that the king had an only child who got sick. And the doctors came and said that the child is not allowed to eat anything in the palace besides the curative food that he desires. Make sure he eats nothing else besides that food. Says the Zohar that when the Jewish people came out of Egypt, they were sick. They did not understand faith. They did not have the fundamental secrets of faith. And so God gave them matzah to eat. And he said, do not look at any chametz, any leavened bread. And so by eating matzah for 7 days, this is the way they will be healed. This is the way they will have faith. And then throughout the rest of the year, they can eat the chametz. A question comes to mind. What does it mean the Jews had no faith? After witnessing the 10 plagues, these 10 miracles, after witnessing God passing over all of the houses, killing the firstborn Egyptians, sparing the firstborn of the Israelites, walking out of Egypt with 90 camel loads full of silver, gold, diamonds, and rubies, they had no faith. They need to eat matzah to internalize the faith. And the answer is, it's possible to have faith, but the faith is only a faith that is superficial. By eating matzah, you are internalizing that faith. The Gemara tells us that a thief, before he goes into the house to steal, he prays to God, God, I should be successful. I should make a lot of money tonight. God, I shouldn't get caught by the police. If you believe in God, why do you steal? You have faith, but the faith is superficial. And so the mitzvah of matzah, the mitzvah of eating this unleavened bread, gives us the ability to internalize this faith. This, my dear friends, is the meaning of faith. It's something that we work on every day. We try to internalize it. And this is the meaning of faith, as the Alter Rebbe tells us in Tanya, chapter 42. He says that the word emunah, faith, is like uman, which means a craftsman, someone who is constantly working to perfect their talent. So too, we were given faith as a gift. The entire Jewish nation were given the DNA of faith from Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Sarah, Rivka, Rachel, and Leah. We all have it. And women have it even more, because emunah is in the feminine. And therefore, women are born with a greater level of faith. Yet all of us need to internalize it. Each one of us needs to eat that matzah. We have to work on that faith every single day to make it stronger and stronger and yet stronger. And so, when we celebrate the holiday of Pesach, we eat the matzah. We internalize that faith. A student once asked Rebbe Chana, the Rebbe's mother, what is the Rebbe's favorite prayer? She said, I don't know. I'll ask him. And so she asked the Rebbe. The next day she told the student, the Rebbe said his favorite faith or prayer is Moda'ani. The student said, wow, that's interesting, but why Moda'ani? A few months later, out of Farbrengen, the Rebbe spoke about the Moda'ani. And he said, we end with the words, Rabba emunasecha. Great is your faith. Your faith in who? In what? And the Rebbe said, great is your faith. God has faith in every single Jew. And we thank God for having faith in us. And so coming to the Seder, eating the matzah, the food of faith, knowing that God has faith in us, that is liberating. That is the greatest freedom. And so that strengthens our faith for the coming of Mashiach, L'Shana Haba B'Yerushalayim.
You know, you talk about sometimes we have the faith, but we're not feeling it fully. You know, we're trying to internalize it more. and you speak about a continuum, and it's never ending, right? So, sometimes the same thing that inspired me yesterday doesn't inspire me today. And I'm trying to get inspired. So what do I do? Where do I look? One of my favorite pieces in the Haggadah, the way that is Ma'aseh Rabbi Eliezer, Rabbi Yeshua, Rabbi Elazar ben Azariah, Rabbi Akiva, Rabbi Tarfon. These sages who we just named. There was a story about them. Shahoyu Mesubim b'Bnei Brak. They were sitting and having a Seder, Pesach Seder, in the town of Bnei Brak. V'hoyu mesaprim b'tzias Mitzrayim kol eiseh halayla. And they were talking about the Exodus all night. Until what? Ad shabo talmideyim. Until the students came. V'amru lehem, and said to them, Rebbe Seinu, masters, he gives man krishim al shel shachris. The time for the morning Shema has arrived. A couple of questions that Rebbe asks about this. First of all, the time of the morning Shema, you don't need anyone to tell you. Look out the window. You'll see it's the time for the morning Shema. Second of all, what are the students interrupting the masters? They're still having their Seder. They're still talking about the Exodus. Well, why the interrupt? We know that it's a mitzvah aleinu lisaper b'tzias Mitzrayim, which doesn't just mean it's a mitzvah for us to tell the story of going out of Egypt. It's a mitzvah for us to go out of Egypt by telling the story, to talk and inspire each other until we experience the Exodus right here and now. So these sages, they were on a very, very high level. So imagine their capacity, imagine their threshold for spiritual inspiration. To inspire Rabbi Akiva, you needed a real bomb, something really big. So they were Farbrengen with each other all night, trying to get each other inspired. And their capacity was so huge, they just couldn't get to that critical mass. So the students came and they said, Rebbe Seinu, our masters, you did it for us. By us, the light is shining. It's Krishma Shel Shachris. It's time for the morning Shema. It's time to say, Hashem is one. In other words, they were saying, masters, you did it. You accomplished your goal. You went out of Mitzrayim. You had your Exodus. Oh, no, I didn't have my Exodus yet. I might have facilitated your Exodus. It's one and the same. When you facilitate somebody else going out of their limitations, having their moment of epiphany, of aha, if you were the one who helped it happen, it's as if it happened for you. So sometimes the greatest thing you can do for your own spirituality, don't try to get inspired, be inspiring. Inspire somebody else. Lift them out of their limitations.
Yeah, this is the well-known. We read in the Haggadah, "B'chol davar dar chayav adam l'eretz asmei," that every generation you have to see yourself coming out of Mitzrayim, and the Alter Rebbe gives us the clarification. Once in a generation we go through this thought process of going out of Egypt, but it's actually every single day, and that's something that we actually need to internalize. So it's not superficial, as you were speaking before.
It's the Rebbe's birthday, and we know the Rebbe never wanted money or gifts for his birthday, but he wanted us to make resolutions, to build more Chabad houses, to do more mitzvos, to put on more tefillin. That was the gift the Rebbe accepted. So, l'chaim, let us resolve today, in honor of the Rebbe's birthday, to do more mitzvos, more good deeds, inspire more people, and to celebrate together many, many happy occasions to come. L'chaim.
Amen, amen, l'chaim, l'chaim. It's a very fascinating thing. We know if you meet a poor person and you have all the sympathy in the world, but you can't do something for him, you can't give him the dollar or the sandwich that the person needs, the sympathy is nice, but it's not helping the person. So however we observe Pesach, how can we observe it this way so that it's touching our neshama, our soul, in a deeper way? And this is not only through the rituals of Pesach, but also through the experience of the messages of Pesach, as we were discussing. And the greatest beneficiary of us doing this is not we actually are awakening and liberating the very spirit that we are trying to get in touch with. haba b'Yerushalayim.